There was once a man named Reza who owned a small, quiet bookshop at the end of an old street. Dust covered most of the shelves, and the bell above the door rarely rang. Years ago, Reza had been a poet, one whose verses spoke of stars, rain, and the fragile heartbeat of hope. But after life had dealt him too many blows, the death of his wife, the loss of his only child, and the slow fading of his dreams, he had closed his notebook and opened a bookstore instead. He sold words, but he no longer believed in them. Every morning, he would unlock the door, sweep the floor, and sit behind the counter, sipping his cold tea while the world outside passed him by. The only sound that reminded him of life was the fluttering of a small blue bird that sometimes perched by his window, singing softly as if trying to wake his heart. One rainy afternoon, as Reza was closing the shop, the door creaked open. A young woman entered, drenched and shivering. She looked around the store, then at him and said, "Sir, do you sell dreams here?" Reza smiled faintly. "Only second-hand ones," he said. She laughed the kind of laugh he hadn't heard in years. Then she picked up an old poetry book from the shelf and said, "Can you teach me to write like this?" He wanted to refuse. He was done with poetry, done with everything that reminded him of what he'd lost. But something in her eyes, that same quiet fire he once had, made him nod. So she began visiting the shop every evening after work. They would sit by the dusty window as the bluebird sang outside, and Reza would show her how to write about rain, silence, and the small invisible miracles of everyday life. Weeks turned into months. The young woman's words grew stronger, truer, and Reza's heart, without him realizing, began to beat with life again. One evening, she brought him a folded page and said, "This is for you." It was a poem about a man who once sold words but forgot how to live among them, until a bluebird taught him to listen again. When he looked up, she was gone. Only the bird remained by the window, singing under the sunset. Reza opened the door, and for the first time in years, he let the wind enter his shop and his soul. He whispered softly, "All right, little one, let's begin again." That night, he reopened his old notebook. The first line he wrote was simple. "Some stories don't end. They just change hands